Welcome to the Gridiron Expert. I'm Connor Hibbett. Next up on our team previews, we're going to be looking at the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And joining us on the channel today is Brian Christopherson. Brian, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Connor. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into the different position groups, Brian, please tell our viewers where they can find your content.
Yeah, Husker247.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network, covers everything from recruiting to the team to the roster stuff we're going to be going over to bold predictions, columns, all that good stuff. So it's always there, always something new every day.
Gotta love bold prediction season, one of my favorite times of the year. Well, looking on the field for the Cornhuskers in 2025, we'll start at quarterback. Obviously, Dylan Raiola returns for his sophomore season. I saw you put out an article yesterday talking about your expectations of his growth compared with his specifically his touchdown to interception ratio. What are your expectations for Dylan as well as the quarterback room overall?
Yeah, I mean the first thing I'd say about Dylan Connor is that you know, he probably played more than any true freshman quarterback last year. Maybe he had company with one or two other guys, but even like Lagway, and Arch Manning, those guys didn't put as much on film as Dylan did. That is, start every game or be in that sort of atmosphere where all your warts are like put out there and people discuss them and question what you can do and what you can't do. He was available and durable last year. He started with a bang. Like his first month of the season was really good. I mean, it was as good as you could have asked for a true freshman. He hit a slump in October. There's no question about it. He ended up with 13 touchdowns, I think 11 picks off hand. I threw out there the other day in the article, like, I think he's got it within him to be like a 2.5 to 1 touchdown to ratio guy where you have like 20 TDs, 8 picks. And if you can even be better than that, Nebraska's cooking with gas then. So, that's going to be the big thing. Can he learn from his lessons that first season, process things just a little bit quicker? And honestly, can he get better wide receiver play too? I think they were okay last year, but they didn't get great separation at times. And so they can help him out as well. I think there's cautious optimism within the Husker fan base about what he's going to do this year. But I also think nationally, I've kind of noticed that people are kind of strict on grading him from last year. It's like he's got this and that that's not quite right. The book's not written on him. That was the first season. Very few people start at quarterback at this level as a true freshman, and I think you got to remember that. So let's see what he can do with his sophomore year. And I think Husker fans are hopeful that this, the quote unquote sophomore slump, there's kind of that thought like, well, maybe that was his October last year as a true freshman. Maybe he surges and kind of gets past those potholes that he had in the middle of the first season. So we'll see.
the bigger of the bigger the name, the higher the expectation is, even right out of the gates, even as a true freshman. And so if whatever that high expectation is put on him by maybe some outsiders, and if he doesn't even live quite up to that expectation, it's like, okay, well, he disappointed, and so it's like they're already on the radar and being scrutinized. But I think Dylan played pretty well as a true freshman, and I think he could have a huge breakthrough season in his sophomore year. I mean, what are and what were your thoughts about the external expectations for Rayola entering his freshman year?
Well, I mean, it comes with the territory, right? You're like a five-star recruit, top 10 nationally. There's just an expectation that you're going to eventually play at an elite level. And there's a lot of finances involved with these guys nowadays where, people kind of expect you to perform. The thing I think would give him a lot of credit for, and we've especially seen it this offseason, is how he's developed as a leader. And I think he feels more comfortable with his voice in the huddle and sort of. I don't think he ever really had a problem being the face of things, like from a player perspective for the program. But even more so this offseason, you see it. He's sort of everywhere in the state. Like he goes to all these events, but he's also putting in the work. And I think he handles very well. When you're the starting quarterback at Nebraska, I've always said you're one of the top five most talked about names at the dinner table. You're probably the most talked about throughout the year when it's all said and done, maybe just behind the head coach, I guess. But he deals with that pretty well, and I think he knows that um, there's this expectation for him during his time here to become an elite player, and I think that's probably the standard he has for himself. So they always say pressure is a privilege, and that's sort of the way you have to look at it.
So you briefly mentioned the receivers last season. So for this season, it's going to be a relatively new look group, especially at the top of the depth chart. So they bring in a couple of transfers: Dane Key from Kentucky, Hunter from Cal. They return Ja'Cory Barney, who played pretty well as a freshman, showed some pretty high ceiling last year at times. What is your thought about this receiving core, and then what's the depth looking like in the room?
I think they're going to be better than last year. They've got to prove it though, because around here, we talk Husker football every day on the radio, and it's just constantly in your face. But we'll convince ourselves in the off season that Nebraska's got like 7 or 8 deep at wide receiver, and then some of these years you'll get to like late October, you're like, oh, they got like 2 or 3 guys you really feel can get a lot done consistently for you. I think they truly believe, and there's reason to think, at least looking at it on paper, that they have like 5, 6, 7 this year. You mentioned some of them. Dane Key comes in. Having played at Kentucky, kind of with middling quarterback play too. It wasn't like he had just an all-star at that position. I'm feeding him the rock, and he still was, in that 600, 700 plus yard category. He's been exactly what they hoped for as a leader. And Isaiah Hunter's a really exciting prospect out of Cal, who had, in that kind of 400, 500 yard range, and has shown that he can go get the ball in traffic. Big kid, he's 210, 215, and he plays like it, according to Dana Holgerson. And then you mentioned Barney. It's interesting because usually around here, Barney would be like so overhyped in the off season, but because of the new guys, there's sort of this distraction where they're the shiny objects, and Barney's just kind of gone about his thing. He's out of Miami, and really tough kid, like not afraid to take a hit. Had about 500 yards of offense, but also had like 2 or 3 huge explosives that were like called back because of penalties that didn't count, but you saw what could have been too with his yardage total there. And so I think Barney, I would just highlight him, as much as we talk about the new additions, as someone who I think can get a lot done in the slot and kind of chew up the middle of that field. The question to me, Connor, is can Nebraska find 1 or 2 guys to take the top off of defense? And last year, that was a problem in the passing game. I think they were like 6.6 per yards per passing attempt, and it was like 97th or something. It was pretty low, and they didn't have a lot of plays of 30 yards or more. And I'm not saying you live on that, but you know how that can change the game, where you get 1 or 2 of those a game, and it opens stuff across the middle of the field in the intermediate passing game. So I'd like to see that where they can stretch the field a little bit more.
Yeah, and having those explosive plays can be a huge changing factor, especially in close games. And we know Nebraska will be in some close games every
Oh yeah,
single year.
that's
Yeah.
where they live.
So, do you think that they're out of those few guys we mentioned in the receiving core, do you think that there will likely be an alpha here, like a true wide receiver one, or do you think that there's a pretty good rotation of like 3 or 4 guys who they trust who can get, say, 500, 600 plus receiving yards?
I'd still bet on Dane Key just because of his proven track record over 3 seasons. He's always done it, and why would that change? But I think it's more of a question than some do. I think there's a lot around here that it's just like it's Dane Key, and then there's the others are a little bit behind. I'm not positive on that, but I would say Dane Key if you said who's going to lead in receiving yardage. But I guess the way I'd answer it is I don't necessarily think it has to be a deal where sometimes we'll get caught up in these talks about like, oh, they need this 1,000 yard receiver. That yeah, that'd be nice and great for that person. But let's say you have somebody who chews up 840 yards of receiving, and then the second guy's like 600 some, and the third guy's 570. Like I want that kind of balance to me is worth more. And a couple guys I'd throw into the conversation too that are wild cards are Cortez Mills and Isaiah Mosey, who are true freshmen. Cortez Mills, especially, Another Miami kid grew up kind of around Ja'Cory Barney, has a lot of the same traits and I guess I'd say mindset, just that I belong right away. Like he's not going to dip his toes in the water. I think he expects to come in and make plays. And I think Cortez Mills could be a guy who's at least in that top 4 or 5 of the receivers. So we'll see. He's got to keep going over the summer, but they were really happy with the true freshman. And when you hear Husker fans talk about, I think they have depth at that spot, there is some of that banking on guys who are in their first year of college really putting out. So we'll see if they can do it.
In regards to the running game, this looks like a pretty deep room. What are your thoughts about the running back room for 2025?
Well, Emmett Johnson's RB1 clearly, and he seems to have found his groove, especially with Dana Holgerson as the OC. And the thing about Emmett is he's a shifty running back, but I think he wants to be known as much as a just a weapon, as he said, like a guy who can catch passes and do everything. And kind of interesting, in the last 4 games when Holgerson called the plays, Emmett Johnson caught 23 passes, and he had some big plays in there. I mean, he had a huge play on a 4th down against Wisconsin. He had another catch out of the backfield against Boston College in the Pinstripe Bowl that scored a touchdown, scored one against USC. So I think you'll see him very active. If you're like a fantasy college football player and you want and you get points for just accumulating catches and all that, I Emmett Johnson I think is a pretty good value pick actually, and I'm not
Noted.
someone who
Noted.
dabbles in
Noted for this
that
season.
dabbles in that, but I think people will be very happy with that. And another reason they'd be happy with it is there is a question after him, like, what do they have? Because the coaching staff believes that they've got the guys, and Quinton Ives, who's been behind the scenes for 2 years, he's only carried the ball like 2 or 3 times in his career. Makai Nelson's a redshirt freshman they like, and there's a couple true freshmen, Jamarian Parker and Connor Booth, who are trying to make a push. But none of those guys have done anything or much at all in college. Not a knock on them. Some of them just got here. But Quinton Ives is a big storyline around here because there's a lot of Husker fans who think like they should have really got into the portal and added one more back. And they did look around. They didn't want to overextend financially for someone, but they also have a belief that Quinton Ives, who's like a 215-pound guy, can be sort of what Dante Dowdell was last season. And those who followed that will know Dante came here from Oregon, was sort of Nebraska's short yardage back. He was very effective, scored like 10, 12 touchdowns, but he went to Kentucky through the portal. And so Husker coaches would tell you, hey, last year at this time you were saying, what do we have? And we developed Dante Dowdell, and he was productive. We're going to do the same thing. But that's sort of I would say it's a storyline that has some angst around it with the Husker fan base, where they want to see for sure that they have somebody behind Emmett, because you do have to be like 3 or 4 deep, I think, at that spot anymore, knowing how injuries can come.
Absolutely. And looking at the offensive line, do you think that there's room for growth here, or is this still a question for right now?
I think it could be a strength of the team. A reason I think that is across the board on their front 5, they're going to have basically 4th, 5th year guys in college. And I think that's the way you have to live in the Big Ten. Once in a while, there's that special kid, who's 19 years old and can do it. But a lot of times, O-line's that spot where you do have to develop them like 3 years. They brought in Rocco Spindler from Notre Dame. He's their right guard. And, he started a lot of football for the Irish last year. Brings sort of that mentality of a guy who just was in a program that was in the national championship and saw how that worked. And he's fit in well. And then they brought in Elijah Pritchett from Alabama at left tackle. And Pritchett's one of those guys who, when the stories were first written about him, it's like, oh man, his PFF grades weren't that great at last year at Alabama. And there's sort of that sort of talk. But he had a good spring. He was progressing from everything we've heard, and I think they liked where he was at the end of it. Now he's got to keep coming with that, but it was a good 15 practices for him. Justin Evans is going to be the starting center, and he's been the starter at guard, so he's moving over, but I think they really like him. Holgerson thinks he can be one of the better centers in the country. And then they are going to have, whether Henry Latovsky is going to play either guard or tackle, and they've got other guys like Turner Corcoran, who's like a 5th, 6th year guy, and some some young players they like that are in the mix to sort out who the final five are. But the bottom line is it's going to be an O-line that has as much experience as any spot on the roster. And so you're sort of counting on that to like, okay, they've developed, they've spent their time, figuring out what it takes to play at this level in the trenches, and you hope that they can just kind of hit the ground running.
So this has the opportunity to be the best Nebraska offensive line in a while then.
It has the opportunity to be that. I'm not going to just predict it, but I know there's some that are bullish around here that think it can be that, and I'm open to that argument. I think there is definitely the possibility, particularly because of I think Spindler is a really big addition, and I think there's two guys that are sort of slept on that have built their game up the last year or two, and that's Justin Evans, who's going to be the center, and Henry Lutovsky, who'll be either right tackle or left guard. I think both those guys have. There's been inconsistencies. Don't get me wrong, but I think they're kind of that point in their career where you might see their best football, and so if that happens, and Dylan Raiola has that support and has time in the pocket, it's obviously going to be pretty beneficial for him, and that'll help his stats as well.
And if Elijah Pritchett hits his ceiling, yeah, this offensive line could really take off here with production.
Yeah, you got to have that guy at left tackle. So that's the thing. Like Elijah's got to go do it. I mean, they do have options behind him if there was a failure there, but I think the encouraging thing, and this has probably bolstered some of the O-line talk in recent weeks, is that Pritchett did have a good spring, it seems like. And so that's what people are wanting to hear. And now he's got to take it in the summer and all that. But I mean, he's like a guy who played at Alabama and started and was in the conversation since he was a freshman at that level. So he's got the traits. There's no question. Like he's
Absolutely.
built like an NFL type O lineman. It's just getting it out of him.
So defensively, this was a quality unit, and that's what we should expect at Nebraska. And so they do lose though a lot of production, especially
Mhm.
in the front six, front seven. So we'll look at those units first, starting off with the defensive line. Who is supposed to be like that next breakthrough player? Who are the guys that Nebraska's going to be leaning on, or is this still a group that's trying to be developed here?
If you were an outsider looking in at Nebraska and you said, okay, what's the problem here? What's the worry? It would be that you would highlight the defensive line. The Husker coaches don't think that, and the guys involved don't, which is a good thing. But it is a question mark until it's proven it's not. And the reason is because Ty Robinson's a guy they have to replace. He was, as Rule called, like a cheat code last year. Nash Hutmaker was a big, nose who played a lot of snaps for him the last couple of seasons. And Jamari Butler's a guy who went to LSU. So um, three experienced Huskers, and we were so familiar with their names because they were like the starters for like of the three last years or more that sometimes I do think it's hard, like, especially in a place like this that is just so football centric where their names are there every day, like on the radio and stuff. It's hard to move on sometimes, and like, okay, can the next guy step into that? The reason I have some optimism is Ty Robinson was great last year. Nash and Jamari were both kind of banged up. And so because of that, the bar isn't quite as high from what they did last season as some people may put it. I think it can be reached. The guys who are going to need to do it is Riley Van Poppel. He's in his third year, and he's a recruit they really like down out of Texas. His dad, Todd Van Poppel, was a major league pitcher back in the day. Some might know that name. Riley is a big kid, 295, 290, and he's really done well, like in his limited snaps that we've seen so far. Keona Davis is a guy who's going to have to step up. He played last year as a true freshman, like 115 snaps or something like that, and he's moved his body from 245 to 270. And honestly, he was like rumored or he was going to enter the portal. It was said because there was a position coach change, and then he pulled his name out. And honestly, there was probably the biggest reaction to him as anybody of like, woo, like that was a bullet dodge to have him back because I think they think his potential is that big. Elijah Judy is a senior who's just got to be solid. Cam Lenhart is another. So those are the main four. And then where it gets interesting is when you're trying to fill out that depth, they have Williams Winari, who was a 5-star, actually ranked number 6 in the 24 recruiting class, even one spot ahead of Raiola nationally. And he was at Missouri his first year. Didn't do a lot there. Redshirted, played in, a sampling of games, but he's got the look, of an NFL type guy. It's just how much can he give you this quickly? Maybe he can give you a lot. And if he's like a game wrecker suddenly and you're hearing about him this season, it changes. Know what's going to happen with him yet, but he's here and he's got talent. And then there's another transfer they brought in named Jalen George from East Tennessee State. People won't know his name, but this staff circled him early in the portal process. He was one of the first guys they brought in. He was injured some of the spring, so we don't know a lot about like how he was progressing from the outside looking in. But if he's a guy that will help a lot too.
Yeah, so George, he started 23 games over his final 2 seasons at ETSU, recording 54 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, a few sacks, also had a couple of forced fumbles and a couple of fumble recoveries as well. So, and you mentioned, so the coaching staff, they saw something about him that they really liked because, like you just mentioned, they immediately highlighted him. So maybe Jalen George is a name to watch for this coming fall.
Yeah, I think he's a wild card at least. It's tough when you have a player who just got here, and then I heard some good things about him in the winter work, but he suffered a setback, not like major, but enough that he wasn't like available in the spring, and so that hurts obviously when you just got to a school and you didn't have those practices. So that's where it becomes a little tough. They're gonna need somebody, and it's gonna probably even be a name I didn't even mention. Like there's a young guy, Mason Goldman, who's an in-state recruit from a couple years back, who's now in his third year. It's guys like that you really need in the Big Ten to fill out your D line, where you have like 6, 7, 8 guys. Where when it's guys, let's say 5 through 7 who are in for their snaps, you don't see this massive drop off. You know what I mean? Where you're like, where you feel like you're just getting pushed around. So that's the biggest thing I think to surviving in this league. And so that's the question I think I have. I feel pretty good that those top 3 or 4 are going to come along and play pretty good football when it's all said and done. But will they get guys 5 and 8 to not be that far behind them?
So at linebacker, the top three in terms of production have to be replaced, but they do bring in a couple of intriguing transfers. So Deshaun McCullough from Oklahoma, and then the Watson Trent from Georgia Southern. He was one of
Hmm.
the best players in the Sun Belt over the last few seasons. And then they have a couple of other guys that are that look to be in-house developments for this coming fall. What is the outlook at linebacker for this fall?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up their names too, because let me start with McCullough because he's like what they call a jack linebacker. So basically, he will be on the second level sometimes, but he'll also be interchangeable, almost like a D lineman. So you could fit him into the equation of the guys we were just talking about. And he's sort of been all over the place in his career because he's got one of those body types where he can be positionless, and that's a great trait. Sometimes, though, it can be tough for a guy because he can't ever settle in a home. I think he feels like he has a home closer to the line of scrimmage in what they're asking him to do, and so he's got to be a game wrecker. He's got to be a guy who causes some problems with the pass rush. And this guy is not a transfer, but Willis McGahee the fourth, who is the son of Willis McGahee, the running back, he is also at that jack spot. And circle his name. He was good last year, and in about 110 snaps, he'll get a lot more this year. And I would watch out for him. So Willis McGahee the fourth, I want to make sure I say his name and emphasize it because I think he's going to be really important. Marquise Watson Trent, he's more of a natural linebacker, and he did come from Georgia Southern where he had like 360 tackles. So he's done
Ridiculous.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a matter, and he wants to prove this of I can play at the Big Ten, like because he's like a 5'10" ish, 5'11" guy who, because of he's a little shorter in stature, probably out of high school wasn't the most highly recruited guy, so he ended up at Georgia Southern and just put up numbers. In fact, his team beat Nebraska in Memorial Stadium in Scott Frost's last game the day before he was fired. So he's played in the stadium. But Watson Trent has fit in really well, and he's already become one of the team leaders. And then the other two names, there's a bunch of names you could bring up a linebacker, but Vincent Shavers is going to be a real important cog in the defense. Had a great pinstripe bowl, was a true freshman last year. He's out of Miami, can fly around the field. It's just like how big is that second year jump for him? And then the one that probably people around the country don't know about, but it might be the biggest deal on the defense is Javen Wright. And he's in his seventh year in the program. And there's a whole story of how that happened. But he's dealt with blood clots and just unfortunate things that have kind of popped up here and there. And he's never had like a full runway into a season, but he's always been pretty good when he actually has like his health and the opportunity to shine. And so there's that thought that he could really do some damage if he actually has a normal, what people would call like a routine season for the first time in his career, basically. So Javen Wright is definitely a guy I would name.
So this linebacker room looks like it's got quality depth, and if they can stay healthy, it looks like it could be a strength again.
They feel really good about it. Like before spring, if you had just asked people don't like me to talk a lot but don't necessarily know everything and you don't see it all, um, like they had these guys who just popped up. Like Jacob Bauer is a fun story. He was a walk on, and then he's actually Connor. He's the type of story that's not going to exist as much at Nebraska because of the 105 rule that's coming in. Because I don't think he would have ended up here. But he came in here the last 2 years and just sort of proved himself. He passed on a scholarship to play rugby at West Point and bet on himself and told his mom, like, I'm going to get a scholarship at Nebraska. And by the end of the spring, Rule gave him one, or whatever you want to call it. They're going to pay for his schooling somehow, some way. And he's in the mix as a starter. So, point being, using him as an example, they have had sort of these guys pop up where they say they're like three deep at two of the linebacker spots or feeling pretty good about it. So, it's a position where some might have called it a question mark before the spring, but if you kind of nod your head to what the coaches have said, you're kind of like, okay, they might have the goods there.
Yeah, and by the way, that's an awesome story for what you just said. But yeah, if they can stay healthy with Wright, Shavers, and then Watson Trent bringing the experience from Georgia Southern, if McCullough, which by the way, so McCullough transferred to Oklahoma last year from Indiana, and I
Mm.
know Indiana, the folks around Indiana were not exactly happy when McCullough left. So they there's a lot to be excited about McCullough. So I think this linebacker room, again, if they stay healthy, it could be actually a pretty good unit in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think it can be. It's an interesting time here because, you know, when you're talking about the defense, the first 2 years of the Rule era, Tony White was the defensive coordinator, and he went to Florida State. With him, Terrence Knighton, who coached the D line, played in the NFL. He's at Florida State. And the secondary coach who started with Rules at Florida State too. And so it is kind of a new look staff on that side of the ball. Like John Butler is a defensive coordinator. I think he's going to be really aggressive. I think he's going to look for dynamic blitzers and ways he can use those second level guys to get to the quarterback in different ways to put some heat on them. And so I think if nothing else, they're not going to sit back. It's going to be an I have a sense they are going to be an aggressive crew on that side of the ball. And so you hope that someone, whether it's McCullough, McGahee, Javen Wright, Vincent Shavers, Watson Trent, those five names maybe pop into my head first. Like they just like a couple of them just are around the quarterback a lot and just cause problems.
And I'm certainly going to remember the name McGahee because you told me a few minutes ago to remember that name, mentioning it a few times there. So in terms of returning experience from last season, the secondary brings back the most experience. They've got a few seniors here. It looks like projected to be starters with Singleton, Sierra Wright, and then Hartzog, I think, at the rover position. So
Mm.
how does this secondary look in your opinion? Do you think it could be a strength early on for the Cornhuskers?
Uh, they should be because they've got like 10 to 11 that they like at that spot. Like at the end of spring, when I say that, like Rule mentioned. Like there were five guys who could maybe start at corner at that time, six safeties or vice versa. And so they feel like there's guys that are very close, whether if they're not starters, they're bumping up against those guys. Sierra Wright's a good person to focus on. He came over from USC, arrived late in the summer last year, and just fit in. He was also, by the way, LeBron James' son in the movie Space Jam 2. If people want to check that out, he played the role of his son because he was in the Los Angeles area at the time.
I did not know
Gr
that. I'll check that.
yeah,
I'll check into
yeah,
that.
great personality and just a really solid corner. Like one of those guys, like even if it, you know how there's some corners where a guy will catch a ball on him occasionally, but he's always there. Like it's good coverage and you never felt like he just got toasted or anything like that. Sierra Wright was that guy last year. So if he can take that and just keep going, I think he's a next level type player. The guy that I think the coaching staff would say is an NFL player, and he's just got to go show it now, is Deshaun Singleton. And he's going to be kind of a rover. He's been a safety. He's like a third safety, but I think they'll use him closer to the line of scrimmage sometimes and then back him off. He'll probably come on some blitzes once in a while. So I think there's going to be a lot of versatility to what he does. And so he's a guy to probably mark. Hartzog has played a lot of football. Marquise Buford has played a lot of football. Those are four of the starters. On the other side, they have good competition. Andrew Marshall's a kid they brought in from Idaho, who I think has a chance to be the other starter. If not him, it's Amari Sanders maybe. Those are some of the names, but it's been a deal. It's kind of an ongoing not joke or something around here. That's like there's like 20 plus names in that secondary room. And so it's kind of the thought like, well, you better figure it out because you got enough dudes where there's got to be some guys who can play. And I think they feel like they're there, but now you just got to go show it. And what I want to see is them be a more opportunistic defense that they did have. It's a little harsh of me to say because they had three pick sixes last year. But if you look at their takeaway total, I still think there's room to grow where you have that season where you have, you know, you're in your 20s with takeaways and it's just like everyone's kind of getting theirs. Like they need one of those years. Like the biggest topic around here for like 2 decades is turnover margin. Like one, I mean, it's just one of the things. Like Nebraska has since 2003 when they were like plus 23, 2 years since then. So we've played 21 seasons, right? Since then, 2 years since then, Nebraska's been plus in turnover margin. Two out of 21. They broke even here and there, like one or two times, but only 2 out of 21 years. So they need that year where, like, people say, well, Nebraska's always stuck in the mud at 6, 7 wins, you know, whatever. If you want to be 9, 10 playoff type team, they need a year where they're like +8, +10, where it just happens, you know, where it feels like the gold is right in front of you and you're grabbing it all the time. So I think that's going to be a big thing. And I'm on that rant because of the secondary. It's just like when those plays are there to be made, they got to go get them.
Well, if Nebraska does, in fact, end up having a breakthrough season, maybe the turnover margin helps that Nebraska was 71st in the country last season in that metric. But if you look at the history of Matt Rule in his third years at the college level, Temple, Baylor, now Nebraska, he's in his third year in Lincoln. You look at his third years again at his other places, he typically breaks through. What do you think, Brian, should be the expectation for the Cornhuskers in 2025?
Um, After 7-6 last season, I would say, you know, 8 and above is kind of the bar. I think there's the really optimistic Husker fan that like thinks like, hey, they could be a dark horse, you know, for the CFP and that sort of things. But like you got to get to that 8, 9 win area, and then you see what happens if you have one of those years where you do win the turnover battle significantly and a few breaks go your way. Who knows? I mean, we saw last year with Indiana, we're in a time where things can dramatically shift for a program. Matt Rule has had a lot of success in his third years at programs with the Temple and Baylor. This is a different time. The thing I like about Rule is that I don't think, gets distracted or down in the dumps too much about this shaky sort of ground we're on with college sports. Maybe it's not ideal, but he looks for the positives and ways that it can benefit the program. And I think he thinks Nebraska's well positioned to be one of the better programs in college football. That's why he came to this job because of the resources. The fact that it is actually in the middle of the country can be beneficial in playing in a Big Ten where you have teams that stretch from California to New Jersey. So he looks at things like that and sees the positives, and maybe that's the right man for the moment. We'll see. But Dylan Rilo's got to take that jump. The receivers we talked about have to be a little more dynamic than last year. Emmett Johnson's got to be that dude. And then, if this defense is sort of the same statistically in most categories, but can add some turnovers, then I do think it has potential to be like a 9-win team. But um, as much as people will look at Nebraska's schedule, there's like a game against Michigan, there's a game against Penn State. There's these games like in October where they play Michigan State, Maryland, Minnesota, October 4th through the 18th. You gotta live well in those games. And I'm not knocking any of those programs. Minnesota has owned Nebraska like the last 5 years. They have a winning streak. And so Nebraska's got to go prove they can win there. But those are the kind of games that people won't talk as much about. But if Nebraska's like the team I'm saying, like 8 wins and above, you do well in that middle stretch. So we'll see.
And the schedule that you briefly mentioned there, there's no true road game for Nebraska until Saturday, October 11th, when they face Maryland. And Maryland is not quite as good as they were a couple or a few seasons ago. And overall, there's more Big Ten home games than Big Ten road games. Obviously, it's the 4-5, 5-4 split there, and they have more home games than road games this season. And then again, the road games. Maryland, Minnesota, UCLA, Penn State. Obviously, Penn State being the most difficult of those games, but this is not a Wisconsin strength of schedule here. So it's not the most like difficult schedule in the Big Ten. So if they do win some of those close games, Brian, there's a pretty high floor here and a potential high ceiling.
There's a path. I mean, first off, they play Cincinnati in Arrowhead Stadium on a Thursday night, and Cincinnati's got a returning quarterback in Brendan Sorsby, and they beat Arizona State last year at one point and lost a lot of close games, which is why they ended up at 5-7. But I've been covering it long enough to have seen Nebraska face plant that first week, and it's just a gray cloud that is hard to get around for the rest of the year. So, like, it's actually not coach speak to say that's the biggest game. Like, Nebraska's got to go set that tone because of what you mentioned with the schedule. It does open up. If you come back from Kansas City and you won on Thursday night on ESPN, you're 1-0, enjoying the weekend while everybody else starts. They play two non-con foes in Akron and Houston Christian, who they should handle. Then you're 3-0 with Michigan coming in, and Michigan is kind of trying to figure itself out. Sharon Moore won't be on the sideline for that game. It doesn't sound like because of the suspension. We'll see. Uh, Whether they start like a young Bryce Underwood at quarterback, you'd probably rather play Michigan in September than November. I don't know,
Agreed.
but um, that'll be in Lincoln, and so yeah, anything could happen with that game, and then you get to that stretch I talked about. So there's an opening. We've said that before in the off season around here, and it hasn't quite played out that way. So that's why first things first, you got to go like just be a solid fundamental team that first week and show like it is different. Play with that confidence on national TV on Thursday night where people are like, oh, they look legit. Let's see where that goes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And again, the schedule does not feature Ohio State or Oregon, and they will have to travel to Penn State, and we'll see what the Nittany Lions look like in terms of their preseason hype. And they return a lot, obviously, so it'll be a challenge there on the road. Nebraska will get a bye week before that, but every other game here is very winnable for the Cornhuskers. And again, they do get more Big Ten home games than Big Ten road games. We'll see if that helps out the Cornhuskers in 2025. Well, Brian, really good job previewing the Cornhuskers for this coming fall. And again, we appreciate you being on the channel. One last time for our subscribers and viewers, where can they find all your content?
Yeah, come on over to Husker247.com, part of 24/7 Sports, and it's like I said, it's got everything there.
Well, thank you for being on the channel. You did a really good job.
Yeah, thanks a lot.